US intelligence is pointing to an imminent Russian invasion of Ukraine. There's been a flurry of phone calls between the US, Ukrainian and Russian leaders, and it doesn't seem that anything has been resolved. Joining me live now is Colonel Douglas Macgregor, former senior advisor to the US Secretary of Defence. Thanks so much for your time. What is your take on what we're seeing publicly at the moment? It seems there's been phone calls. The US President Joe Biden once again warning that the US will step in if Russia invades. Is it now looking inevitable?
Well, I think it probably is. Keep in mind that the core issue for the Russians is a very straightforward one. They don't want any foreign forces or missiles from the United States stationed on Ukrainian soil. And that's why they do not want Ukraine to become a member of NATO. So this entire crisis could have been avoided if we'd simply agreed to not expand NATO. A perfectly reasonable suggestion from the Russians, in my judgment. But now they have all of the forces in place. Some people think they still want more time, but I think they've got what they need. They have an integrated air defense capability that reaches from the Gulf of Finland down to the Black Sea. They can now strike at any targets in Western Europe that may host U.S. forces that for any reason would try to interfere with them. Now, clearly, the president has told his military leadership, we will not intervene. And I'm sure that we have no intention of doing so simply because we're in no position to fight a war in Eastern Europe against the Russians.
So why do you say that? Because Joe Biden has said to the Ukrainian leader, apparently, that he will not tolerate, the US will just not stand by if there is a Russian invasion. So how does this play out? I mean, we're being told that an invasion, an all-out war, could be coming within days. And I guess we're being fed propaganda by all sides.
Well, again, the United States and its leadership, since Biden took office, has been very hostile to Moscow on every conceivable issue. And I think Mr. Putin has called their bluff. We simply don't have the ground forces in place, neither do our European allies. We don't have the air and missile defense forces in place. We cannot interfere in this without being drawn into a war that, frankly, in Central East Europe, we cannot win. So I think Mr. Putin has called the bluff. And I think his message is very clear to the Germans, the Poles, and the others in Central East Europe. And that is, in this part of the world, Russia is the decisive power. No one can rescue you from us if we decide to move in. That's a very powerful message, and that's about to be sent.
This is really concerning for the United States, isn't it? It's got echoes of Obama's red line in Syria. I mean, if Biden doesn't follow through on his threats, you're looking at a weakened Western ally.
Well, I think you're right. And I think it's time for the Europeans to understand what Donald Trump tried to tell them for 4 years, which is that we in the United States cannot be your first responder. You must be prepared to defend yourselves. And in the event of a crisis, we can assist, but we cannot move forces across the Atlantic in short enough time to make any difference. This is a different world. We don't control the oceans as we once did. We can't ensure that we can put 150,000 troops on the ground that are capable of fighting. Right now, we're sending light forces. It's almost a joke, frankly. We're about to embarrass ourselves by sending anyone. So I think at the end of this, I would expect NATO to begin to break up. I don't think it's going to survive this crisis.
Colonel, one final question, because here in Australia, we're concerned about rising Chinese aggression. China will be looking very closely at what happens with Russia and Ukraine. If we don't have a strong response there, if the West doesn't have a strong response there, might China take that as a positive for it?
Well, first, you're going to have to prove to me that the Chinese are being aggressive militarily anywhere. They certainly aren't prepared to invade Southeast Asia. They are not preparing to invade Korea, and they absolutely are not prepared to try and invade Taiwan. Those things aren't going to happen. So I don't sign on for this picture of the aggressive military power in China.
No.
I think that you've got to talk to the Chinese and do business with them.
Do you buy the economic dominance in which they are seeking, the diplomatic influence as a precursor to that?
Well, the economic influence is real, and that is, it's up to you and others in Asia who have now signed, and I think you are signatories to the RCEP, the Regional Economic Comprehensive Program, which gives you effectively free trade access to the Chinese economy. So is Japan. I think as long as you understand the limits of Chinese influence and you understand what's at stake, then you can pick and choose from what you will or will not do. The Japanese are very good at that, and the Japanese have signed on for this, and I would follow their lead because the Japanese are very, very familiar with China and vice versa.
Colonel Douglas Macgregor, great to talk to you this morning. Appreciate it. We'll speak soon.